Well, in my country, I can't pretend that I'm often asked to vary a nuptial agreement. I think often people feel we did that and we don't want to ever talk about it again. But if I was to vary it, it would be by a new contract, a new deed. Is that how it works for you, Katja? Are they variable in Switzerland?
Oh, yes. Yes, you can draw up a new nuptial agreement anytime. And actually, I recommend to look at the nuptial agreement, every 5 years and look at it. Does it still meet our, needs and our interests and our values, or has something changed? Do we have now children, and we have to think about that? So I really advise to have a look at the nuptial agreement every 5 years. And actually, there are some who change. Who make changes and amendments, but it has to be, again, written agreement and notarized, but it's no problem to change it. And actually, when I heard Susan telling about how personal property becomes, common property, when you invest something in a house, in a home, like Kath said, this is not the case in Switzerland. So if you have own property, if you inherited something and you invest this in the family home, okay, it's still your property and you can get it back. Plus, like if the value was going up, you will have even more of that. So it's the best thing to invest personal money into common family home. When people start thinking about separation, because other than in Scotland and in California, it's not the date of separation which sets the key date for the separation of assets, but it's actually the divorce itself. Okay, so when this drags out for years, okay, it makes sense to either have a nuptial agreement on separation, saying, okay, from now on, this is separation of assets, which is very simple. They don't even need a lawyer to do that. They can go to the notary, say, as of today, no more common property. Or you do this by court to have this separate, because if you just expect litigation, you should do that, as to avoid complications.
Thank you. Kath, do you vary or do you renew?
Yes, I mean, again, we vary by way of entering into another contract, a new contract. But one thing I would say here is that what often happens is that we have cohabitation agreements, which then become prenuptial agreements. So here, if you are not married, you can still make a financial claim against your partner. Since 2006, we can do that. And what you've got to show is economic advantage or disadvantage. So it's quite common now, particularly when young couples are buying flats together, say, for example, or alternatively, if it's an older couple with assets of their own and they're just moving in together, that they'll enter into a cohabitation agreement. And what we tend to get quite a lot of is, they go off and they then marry maybe 2-3 years down the line, and those cohabitation agreements then become prenuptial agreements. So I do quite a lot of that. And then during the course of the marriage, then yes, absolutely. Oftentimes I'm instructed to vary again. I'm seeing a sort of a big uptick in people who are getting sort of big jobs and big promotions. And it's actually their employers who are asking them to enter into post-nuptial contracts so that any business interest they have or shareholding is actually excluded from the matrimonial pot. One other thing we do a lot of here are what we would term separation agreements, so that here we don't need courts to rubber stamp agreements, so that most couples will just enter into a separation agreement, will negotiate their own, whatever bespoke version of an agreement they want. We often use collaborative practice to get to that point. And then they just sit there with a separation agreement. And many of them don't even go on to divorce. They just quite often, A, it's an added expense, and B, it's not necessary to finalise the finances. So many couples will have a separation agreement in place, but no divorce. And many carry on and go and cohabit. And then what you then have sometimes are bizarre competing claims of wives and cohabitees all looking to make a claim against someone, and then obviously the children as well. So it's complicated, but yes, the short answer is yes, we can vary, and we vary a lot.
Okay. Quite different to England. And Susan,
Yes.
do you vary, and do you vary a lot?
Yes, actually, I wouldn't say there are some people that I work with that do vary a lot. They buy and sell property, and they have different ideas about who should own which, what portion of different pieces of property, something like that. So I would vary a prenuptial agreement with an amendment. So, you know, saying something like this provision will be replaced by this provision. So the amendment is not an entire new agreement. It's a much smaller agreement. So as long as it's in writing and it's signed by each party, and while it's not required, I do have agreements notarized. I think that's really important. And one of the things that comes up, I find, I mentioned younger couples with older couples in California. A lot of times what people will do, and this is allowed, is when they're older, they want to have provisions in their agreement about their estate plans. So something like, you know, if we were to, or maybe they have the children from a previous marriage and this is a second marriage or something like that. And so they want to have some provisions in their agreement, and they want to add that, like, I want to make sure, because people can change their estate plans, so they would want to put something in there that they want to make sure that their estate plans will provide for this. And if they don't, then that would be a charge against their estate should they pass. So sometimes people will, you know, during their marriage, maybe they want to have a post-nup and they want to have it say, you know, actually, I want to make sure that my children from a previous marriage receive this. So that's something that people will change, so that they become living agreements. And because they don't have to be a whole, you know, big agreement again, then that amendment can have can be something that they feel comfortable with. And other couples, they feel relieved. It's done. They know that that agreement is in their safe deposit box, and they don't want to think about it ever again.
Thank you. And I'm guessing, Francesca, that the Italians probably don't vary their nuptial agreements very much like the English. You're on mute.
Sorry for that. No, there isn't a lot of variation, even if you can. The situation is very similar to the one Katja was describing. I think we have the same sort of Roman Napoleonic origin that sort of deals with this matter that we share in common. But one difference regarding what Katja was saying is that you can vary during marriage, but the most common choice is the separation of assets. This is what statistically the majority of couples choose when they marry, especially in big cities, especially sort of culturally or economically sort of elevated couples make that choice. And normally what happens is that there's sometimes is this choice in marriage when a couple had instead hadn't made a choice at the beginning. So there is this change during marriage. That is what we see really as typical kind of changes. Another difference respect to what Katja was saying is that our default regime doesn't end with divorce. It ends at the first hearing of the separation. That was quite a recent innovation in order to avoid the problems Katja was outlining. And so that makes it a bit easier, because before what happened, a typical modification was to do that during the separation or divorce proceeding to make things at least clear. So what was happening, because our proceedings could also last many years, and we have to go in Italy through a legal separation before you can divorce. So it's two different proceedings that, in case of conflict, can be both long, and so that was a problem.
But to be clear from the Swiss side, okay, you don't need to have a separation in court.
Yeah.
But if you do, you can ask for separation of assets during, you know, at this time. So that's a bit of difference. So you can do that. But there's no litigation before divorce, which is not necessary. Then you can make like a nuptial agreement to take care of this problem.